Would you like to step here?
No.
First off, thanks everybody for coming. I know there's probably a lot of speculation as to what's going on. I want you to know that as I know things, that's why I'm calling for the meeting. So if you all remember, this is not connected, but I'll tell you how this all came about. So the incinerator issue in the Village West came up, and we were testing. What I wanted to do was have some controls put in, which means I wanted to see how other places in Coconut Grove would test, because they believed that they would have contamination in and around where the incinerator was. The city decided to test primarily 3 places. This is one of the places that they decided to test. They equally decided to test Peacock Park and a couple of other places that we couldn't gain access to. But they did test this place. As a matter of fact, there's a boring, it's famous SP6, I think it's right about where the garbage can is, and now blacktop. And in that boring, it was revealed that this is a contaminated park. This park is not a little bit contaminated, it's pretty contaminated. Now, it's contaminated at levels presently that we understand to be 6 inches below the ground to 1 foot. You all are standing on AstroTurf. That means your park is capped and sealed. This morning, as you'll see, you no longer have gravel out there. You now have a capped and sealed parking lot, which was sort of a dream of mine, because I think it looks a little better. But every part of this particular park is capped and sealed. Now, what your levels are high for are not good things. Dioxins, heavy metals, barium, cadmium. And by the way, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, but there is a derm person here. Where's Lee Hefty and Wilbur is here. And I don't know what they're going to be able to answer for you or to you. They're the experts, I am not. What I wanted to do is give, especially the parents and the dogs, and the dog owners, the opportunity to know what we know, not weeks later, but as we know it. So you're standing on primarily an entirely capped park. The bad soil test boring was right about where the gentleman with the red tie and the blue shirt is, and if he was born in 1946, I think he had something to do with it. But this is how far back we're going. It is the type of soil we're looking at, or what we're looking at that is contaminated, that is, again, 6 inches below to 1 foot below what you would call just regular, the ground. But bear in mind something, when we capped this, we evacuated inches of soil. We then put rock, drainage rock, I know Carolyn watched it. We then put new soil in. We then put 2 layers of antimicrobial, and then we also put this particular AstroTurf on top of it. I'm not here to tell you that's going to be acceptable to DERM, I don't know, and DERM is over there, or the Department of Health. What I'm here to tell you is, you're on a completely capped park. They're doing further testing on this park. That testing is going to occur around this park, but it's also going to occur around the dog park. The dog park is not 100% capped. You all know that there's places out there where the dogs can still dig. You also should know that where you're standing right there has tested some for some problems in the soil. I don't know where this ends. I know where it began. I wanted you to know what we know as we know it. Alice Bravo is here. She's pretty much been with me every step of the way from the city. You're going to have plenty of questions. I'm not going to have every answer for you. And I'm not the one that can give you the answer. In part, it's going to be DERM that can give you the answer. But we've not known this for very long. We've only known this for about a week's time. And we acted as fast as we could, and we capped the area around SP6. That's what I know. Yes?
So, well, I guess a few questions come to mind. When this was sand, so are we talking about, was that sand on the dirt level at that time, or was there any separation between the sand and
You know, I don't have an answer for you on that other than the question is when there was sand over there, what was below the sand? And I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. Durham's right there. Durham wants to...
Mark, was the incinerator here? Why is it here and not?
And here's what the other thing we do know is in 1946, the city bought this property. How many people were around in 1946? All right, what happened then, Bob? No, just kidding.
High school.
What did you dump? What did you have for breakfast?
This was purchased in 1946 or thereabouts by the city. I don't know if it was purchased as a dump, and I don't know if the city subsequently dumped. The signature of what is below ground 6 inches to 1 foot appears to be ash. Ash is the residue of incinerator burns. And the reason they think it is that, or the reason it has the signature, is because much of it is glass that's been melted. There's also, and then of course, you know, there, as I said before, there are some heavy metals that are contained in there as well. By the way, just because you find ash there, you can't draw a conclusion where it came from or how it got there. There just aren't records enough to know.
You mentioned heavy metals, and you said several times now that this has been capped. Are there any possibilities, probably for Durham, but possibility of things that emit beta particles, that sort of thing? You know, you mentioned cesium. Is this kind of stuff, is anything radioactive, in other words,
No, we do not.
come up through all this capping?
Thank you. This is Wilbur Mayorga from Miami-Dade County, Durham.
Speak up, please.
Yes, I will try. I have a very soft voice.
Why don't you come up here?
Thank you. To answer a few of the questions, number one, the commissioner described it very well. We had the result from the location that he refers to. What we did to understand the extent of the contamination, we already collected last Friday sample results from in every direction, south to the north and to the west, to have the extent of the contamination and therefore require the city to address additional areas if that is needed. Point number two, the chemicals of concerns, the inorganics. When you are dealing with these type of solid waste, this burn glass, this ash, the key indicators are lead, barium, and arsenic. From other studies that we already done elsewhere in Miami-Dade County, we have a good understanding what are the key indicators for that type of contamination, and are those three. There is a very good correlation between finding the actual solid waste, seeing it, and finding the contamination. In plain English, I understand, I have a limitation how much I can project my voice. When you step out of the area where you have a visual of the solid waste, the results tends to be much lower in a rapid decrease. So therefore the visual is very helpful. So based on the visual, our staff last Friday moved outwards to collect samples to define that extent. What the City of Miami did with the paving of that area is an interim, immediate response to the levels that we were able to confirm on September 3rd. So that is the right step. We appreciate the speed of the response, but we need to do more work. As I said, however, this area, we concur with the city. If you do have a barrier, you do not have direct exposure. However, the key is to maintain those engineering control, those barriers, to ensure that they are properly kept so it serves the function to have a barrier between any contamination. We will have the results next week that we collected, for example, between this park and the dog portion. You see that open ground area? We collected a sample right there. So the other element that provides some...
Can you speak up?
Yes, thank you.
I can give you an interpretation of what he said.
So
What he's essentially saying is so long as we maintain the barrier, the impervious barrier, Durham is looking for us to do that. They don't want to see tears, breaks, They want to know that there's always going to be this impervious barrier. What they also have done is taking further soil samplings, and that's what he was describing. Those soil samplings they took last Friday. Those samplings were done all around the dog park. As I said before, as you know, the dog park is not completely capped. It is not completely capped.
However, the composite samples collected earlier, there was an initial sampling effort that included some locations to our left. And those sample results at the 0 to 6 inches composite came clean.
You mean underneath the...
In the open ground areas, on the open ground areas.
Has anything been done under this capped area?
No, because our priority was to understand, as you can imagine, our priority is for you and the citizens who use this park, the open areas, what is there, and if any area requires immediate action. That's what we did with that location.
You said that you had an answer for the sand.
Well, I was going to answer your questions. However, we're in the process of research through historical areas to find what type of deposits occur over time. I know Alice is doing the same research. And one of the techniques that we have is to sample underneath not only the artificial grass layer, but the layers that the commissioner described to understand what are the concentrations from a historical perspective. So that's part of the additional work.
My question though initially is, our kids for years were crawling around
In the sand.
Correct.
So I want to know what was between the soil
Correct.
and the sand. Was there anything? Was there a barrier like the commissioner mentioned, like a antimicrobial or?
No, it was not. That did not exist.
That was later.
So
What are the possible long-term effects of the kids playing in that sand?
Drains water through it.
That's a good question, and I have a follow-up to that if you don't mind me to expand on what you just asked. He said, how can you call this a cap? Could you help us, you and the commissioner have graciously explained to us that this is now 100% impermeable cap. Could you direct me to the study that dictates that AstroTurf somehow constitutes a substantive cap against heavy metals and the chemicals that you described?
Correct.
Is my first question. And the second
Sure.
question, if you don't mind,
No, not
is
at all.
what prompted the initial request for bores and tests? Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me answer the first question. This is an interim action. What the commission described is what you currently have and the benefits of it as a physical barrier. It is a physical barrier. Now, the department will conduct a thorough evaluation based on the chemicals, based on the material specification to the appropriateness of the barrier. One issue that is important to remember when you're dealing with lead is the key chemical. Lead is not a volatile chemical. So here we're not dealing with benzene, we're not dealing with xylene, we're not dealing with toluene, we're not dealing with the solvents that you're familiar with, either from gas stations or for a dry cleaner. Those have an important characteristic. When you're dealing with a solvent, we need to account for the volatilization of such chemicals. The advantage when you're dealing with a metal, inorganic, is that it's not volatile. So you have a tremendous advantage with that. In addition to that, each chemical, based on the Henry's law coefficient and other elements, has different factors, different default concentrations. You may find in the groundwater contamination that it might be below what is indicated will pose a concern from a volatilization perspective. So we review the pathway, we review the concentration and the potential flux of each of the chemicals. That's the complete review. What you're dealing at this moment is the department focuses one primary objective. Do we have chemicals in open areas that require immediate action to remove that direct exposure? That's what we did there. Of course, we all know that the use by all of you and your kids and your pets is of a small amount of time in the parking area versus these areas. However, it was important to us to remove that concern. And the answers are going to come based on actual data. I always answer to questions. I rely on data. I'm a scientist. I use the data to determine what is appropriate.
Hence the question about the study.
Of
so
course.
the answer is there is no study. And
No. What he said was,
I haven't finished the sentence. I'm sorry.
let me let everybody hear what he said. What he said was because this is heavy metals and not a solvent, the heavy metals will stay in place and thereby the barrier, so long as the barrier is not broken, will keep those heavy metals will stay away from the surface area. That's essentially what he said.
Is it heavy metals only, Mr. Mayorga?
Yes.
William Von Burst, I'm sorry. Thanks for returning my call. How was it determined how deep you need to bore? How was it determined how deep you need to bore for testing? And did you do the same testing on this site that was done in the incinerator? Because as you know, the incinerator has been online since 1926, and they've been dumping this stuff somewhere from the moment that it opened. So how did you determine how deep you need to bore to identify the unsolvent, the non-metals?
Correct. Let me answer the second part of your question because it's an important one. We are focused on this part, we understand, but he is very much correct. The initial concerns, as the Commission referred to, started with the former incinerator at Coconut Grove. What we did is we required on July 8th the city to conduct an area-wide sample, because here you have a specific point source that needs to be addressed. The second question is, do we have, because of the atmospheric deposition from the former incinerator, you all remember the old incinerators, you have a plume that will increase its height based on the temperature of the stack, the height of the stack, and it will be dispersed through wind. So the first questions to the city and to the department was, what do you know about the soil quality in all of our houses? And do we have contamination because of the air deposition of that dust from the 1920s to the early 70s? It's a very large span. Here's what we did. We asked the city on July 8th. They submitted a sampling plan to us on August 7th. August 9th, we approved the sampling plan. The city shared with us the concerns that they were not obtaining all the number of samples that we approved. We approved 15 samples, randomly selected, plus 8 specific samples. This is one of them, for a total of 23 locations. The due date was today, and still have at the end of this date for more data. But knowing the concerns as clearly here for this part, but also your concern for your fellow citizens from the other areas, here's what the Miami-Dade County Durham did to assist our agency. We collected independent, concurrent with the city's consultant, independent 40 sampling locations around the former incinerator to supplement and provide validation to the data collected by the consultant. We did this in 4 days. We started August 29th and we did it. We have already the results. We're now in the statistical analysis portion of it that I'm sure you're familiar with to understand compared to other background studies, because we have done 2 former incinerators. The City of Coral Gables former incinerator, we did a study, and the former City of Miami, Northwest 20th Street and 12th Avenue, we did a study of that area. Both of those studies concluded that there was not a health concern based on the results. So we have a tremendous advantage. We can then take our population data from these 1 mile radius of the former incinerator and compare to the 2 previous studies. In addition to that, we're completing a county-wide background study that is also providing a tremendous data to compare and to evaluate. In addition, we coordinated with the Department of Health, Samir Elmir, who is here with me, for their toxicologists to also provide input to evaluate the data. And for example, the data from this park has been shared to the Department of Health here in Miami-Dade County and in Tallahassee for data evaluation too. So that would be my answer to your question. Now for the depth. The interval that the Department of Health and risk assessor toxicologists require us to sample, and you can understand the valid reason for that, is the 0 to 6 inches. Because they feel that that's actually the best indicator of the actual potential concentration in the dust. So, and that's one of the key differences with an open ground outside, the amount of dust that it can generate, particles, versus what it can be generated from here. There's a significant physical process.
What's the barrier to the dust that this serves?
That's part of it. It needs to be, and we can spend half a day in that. You're welcome to visit my office. So, but to your question is very important. However, we're not satisfied with that, because we know. I'm trying very hard.
I can't hear much of what you're saying.
I understand. I have a very soft voice. I apologize for that. So the interval that is required for risk assessors to evaluate the exposure to those chemicals is the 0 to 6 inches. However, we require also to sample 0 to 24 inches. Why? Let's assume for a moment that the 0 to 6 inches is okay, but you have contamination in the 6 to 24. We will then require that a permanent solution, either removal or asphalt or other technique, is utilized to not rely only the 0 to 6 inches because of a practical reason. You know how easy it is to remove via erosion or other factors the first 6 inches. So we do both. We do 0 to 6 inches to answer the risk assessors' needs for data at that interval, and we do the. Yeah.
It seems to me that you're at the assessment phase, and I'm wondering if you're working with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to come up with an outside engineer, some sort of site rehabilitation completion plan, or how to get a no further in action letter, because all these fixes seem temporary at best, and there's a concern that this surface may not be impermeable, and we all know for certain, based on the initial assessment, that there's contamination that can harm everyone who's standing here right now and all of our kids who play on this park. So what I'd want to know is, what steps are you taking to remediate the situation, and is it safe for our kids to play here while it's not remediated?
Correct. Fair question. And for your information, the response from the State County Durham is comprehensive multi-agency. For example, the state, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, contacted us, and we provided information on all the steps that were taken. Similar approach that we did for the former incinerator at Coral Gables and 20th Street. So that's very consistent. They're relying on our expertise at the local level. Now remember, you phrase it properly. This is the initial assessment phase. But none of you want us to wait for a complete assessment document, an engineer's report for a final design of the rehabilitation, which we will do. What we are doing is responding in a timely fashion to define it. So if there's an area that requires an action, we're asking that area for those actions to be taken, which the city did. That doesn't mean that we're not doing more. For example, we collected samples, as I said before, moving upwards, moving outside the initial discovery area. And guess what? At a certain distance, there was no further evidence of the solid waste. That's a key indicator, because we need to determine the extent of the solid waste, thereby having our analysis determine and confirm the extent of the contamination. If you're familiar with our process, you know the site assessment report has one key objective that I need to ensure before I approve it as a professional. The degree and extent of the contamination needs to be addressed. All the design elements of the site rehabilitation will come at that time. But in accordance with our regulation, it's just what we need to do, not only as an environmental official, but just the right thing to do. If there was an action that needed to be taken at that location, we're going to ask the city to do it. That should not be looked as a small step, incomplete step. It's just the initial response.
Mark, can you, because not only can a lot of people not hear what he's saying, but personally I'm not a derm scientist, so I don't understand it all. In answer to the two questions, what prompted the initial testing here at the park? Okay. And second, what can the city do to alleviate the concerns of the families who've been at this park prior to the sealing and the capping of the park? Sure. I mean, we've had kids here and dogs here for 10, 15, 20 years. Right. So can you put this in layman's terms for all of us here? I
can answer the first one easier, which is what prompted this particular, I call this a control spot. We wanted to see what happens is you have what's called aerosolic ash, which means ash coming out of that big stack. And what happens is it's lighter than air for a period of time. So the trade winds would have put it somewhere over Center Grove. That's how the trade winds would have been. So I wanted to see on a control basis, which is what would any of our major parks look like. The city chose this park, the city chose Peacock, We even tried to get into Ransom Everglades, and Ransom Everglades graciously said no thank you. And the answer to your question is it just happened to be a controlled place, which, you know, you want your controls to come back normal, and it didn't come back normal. So, two things that he said that are kind of you're missing on. The 0 to 6 inch level, essentially, Wilbur is saying, has come back pretty clear. It is not at the concern level that the 6 inch to 1 foot level is. My interpretation, not his, of that is you actually had this to be a dump site, which meant people put ash here either in the 40s or in the 50s. But it is not as a result of the ash falling from the sky, so to speak. And that's, you know, I don't think I'm going to have answers for you guys to like, Commissioner, would you put your kid here? The answer is I don't have a kid. Do I bring my dog around every day and I will continue?
Commissioner, can I ask a quick question here? Can I expand on one thing? Can I just ask a quick question? I think it's important for everybody who has their kids here for the last couple of years. According to the Herald article, this has been at least known about since back in 2011. But it's only, hold on, at least there's been a known contaminant in the area since 2011, and the city has been asked to do things at least for the last year. I find it unusual, or maybe a little bit coincidental, that the Herald article comes out today, and all of a sudden this meeting is being held today. And hold on. It seems like it's a little bit of a cleanup effort on the part of the city to let the residents know, don't worry about that front page article, we have it all under control. How are we supposed to know that for our children?
We gave the Herald all the information. I don't know what
the University of Miami gave them all the, actually started with the information to the Grove residents, and the city did not give the information.
Slow down for a second. From 1926 to 1960 or 61, there was an incinerator over in Village West.
On Jefferson.
Right, wherever it was. And then we've all known about that. Nobody knows where that ash was placed. Okay, they didn't keep records, they didn't tell us, and we don't know where that ash was kept. It was pure happenstance that we tested this park. Maybe if we tested more parks, and we're going to have to, we'll find other things. I'm calling this meeting because we came back with some studies that showed a concern. I said to you I wasn't going to have answers for everything, but you're going to know what I know pretty well as I know it.
But you don't know if it's safe here right now?
Could I ask something?
If you don't know the answer, kids shouldn't really be playing in the park.
Testing the soil. We're testing the soil. But we're not talking about the people. The people should get tested.
I want to reiterate something that Mr. Mayorga said.
And you are?
I'm Alice Bravo, Assistant City Manager. He talked about the volatility of the substances.
Speak up, please.
Mr. Mayorga touched on something earlier, that the substances we have here are heavy metals and that they're not volatile.
The ones that floated over from the sky?
No.
Landed?
No.
Dumped here.
The ones that were dumped here.
So that means that they don't release a fume that can be breathed in. The concern is the actual contact and ingestion of the soil.
Right.
And that's why
hands on this soil.
And that's why the capping of this with artificial turf, as well as the capping of the parking area with asphalt, serves as a physical barrier.
But that leads me to another question I think it's important, is that if we're talking about just finding out about this information now, this turf was placed on this area months ago, or maybe longer. Was that in relationship to concerns for contamination that we were not told about? Or is it that coincidental?
That was not the concern.
Yeah, well, I mean, it wasn't. It had nothing to do with
But
it.
Mr. Commissioner, if you say that since you don't have kids, you don't know if you would let your kids play here because you can't speak directly to that.
I said I don't have kids, so I can't make that value determination. I don't think your next door neighbor could make that value determination.
No, but as the ones with the information, you need to make that determination for us as to whether these kids should be playing here.
Durham will tell us. I want you to know what I know as I know it.
Right.
Durham will tell us when or if this park ever closes, and it may never close. That is Durham's call to me. That's why he is here, Wilbur is here. Now, I know you're all concerned. I'm concerned. I live right across the street. This is not something I want to hear or, or demonstrate to my neighbors what happened. Two things happened out of pure happenstance. This park got capped, not because of any deleterious motive. This park got capped because you all asked to have it capped.
Yeah.
That's what happened. You asked to have it capped, and it got capped. The dog park got capped, and the kids park got capped. As it turns out, that may be a great thing. And for some people, it may not be enough. And I understand that. But these are determinations you're going to make. I don't expect you to walk out of here with every one of your